I had originally planned to upload a different long format video this week, but it's taking a lot of writing and I'm not going to get that done in time. I also got a new job roughly a month ago, which makes working on it more difficult. So I've decided I'll do this in the meantime while I finish my other project. Today I'm going to lay out what I feel are some of the most overrated weapons in TF2. I'm determining these not on whether they're good or bad outright, but rather my interpretation of how the community likes the weapon compared to how much I think it's worth using. I think I've implied enough already that this is totally arbitrary on my part, and what I'm going to say is not gospel, but I'm giving you the disclaimer anyway. Warning, this video is a subjective opinion and is not to be taken as advice. If you are sensitive to disagreement or in any way allergic to opinions that do not line up with your own, it is suggested you change programs. Viewer discretion is advised. Okay, are we good? You're not going to get your panties in a wad over what some stranger says on the internet, are you? Well, if you were going to, then I can't say anything else now to convince you. I'm going to do these in class order, and most classes have one answer for the sake of runtime. Scout's meta has more or less been decided out for a long while now. Any experienced Scout player is probably going to tell you that the best weapon choice for serious gameplay is the stock scattergun. I have even heard the argument that it's overpowered, which I myself dissent from, but that's not the point. But I definitely consider stock to be praised way higher than it deserves. Don't get me wrong, I love using stock all the time. It's my second highest strange weapon. And I won't argue, I absolutely think that it's the best option for the slot. But where I differ from most Scout players is I don't think it's the only acceptable choice. Maybe it's because most Scout mains take themselves seriously and care far more about the scoreboard than I do. But so many of them picked stock a long time ago and refuse to touch any unlock whatsoever. It's as if they're terrified of learning the nuances of a new weapon in fear of scoring lower at the end of the match. That, or they had bad first impressions on the unlocks and they just have a subconscious feeling that picking a side grade means an instant loss. I myself consider all of the scatterguns to be decent at worst and on par at best. Soda Popper and Shortstop can come very close in performance if the right person is using them. Force of Nature and Babyface aren't quite in the same tier, but they are not to be underestimated. The Babyface is actually what I consider to be the most underrated weapon in the entire game, but I made a video about that, so instead of being redundant, I'll lead you to that if you want a further explanation. Even the backscatter, while boring and in need of some tweaking, is still lethal and a force to be reckoned with. A skilled player is going to be able to take any of these unlocks and do some serious work. Even as stock would perform better, remember this is casual TF2, not esports competitive. Those minor differences in performance are rarely enough to determine winning and losing. But Scout mains are stubborn and aren't going to change their minds. This stock derangement syndrome is present for most classes, but in my experience, Scout players are the worst victims of it. Soldier has it a bit better with his choices and unlocks. Stock is still the best all around, but most of the other primaries are unique enough and powerful enough that soldiers usually aren't identical slices of the same pie. And the secondary options are almost all good enough to be considered, but he definitely has some overrated options. The disciplinary action could sort of make the pick, since a weird number of soldiers think it's the only viable melee option for the class, but since it's meant for team support, I can't in good faith knock anyone for being helpful. I almost want to say the original. Most original soldiers are suckers for Most original soldiers are suckers for rocket jumping, and can't hit left wall shots with stock, so they took the easy cop-out. If I were exclusively considering strange original soldiers, then I absolutely would pick that, since I consider a strange original to be one of the worst weapons to spend money on. But there's enough original soldiers out there who are perfectly fine with using unique quality that I won't judge them for being preferential. Is that a word? Probably. And enough of them also use banners that it's hard for me to nitpick them. But oh, the gunboats. These take the original soldier stereotype and crank it up 200%. Most people who use gunboats only use gunboats all the time. I have genuinely met a player who said with complete honesty, I haven't removed my gunboats since 2014. Gunboat wearers are the kind of people who think rocket jumping is the only reason to play TF2 at all. Now don't get me wrong, I love rocket jumping and I've spent my fair share of time on Jump Academy. But usually when I play Soldier, I like being a supportive frontline power class. Banners are just way too good for me to pass up. Even if I'm playing a more solo playstyle, I typically prefer a shotgun. Occasionally I do use gunboats and play a roamer-esque playstyle, but I'm not so easily satisfied with just that. I need variety, and gunboat users are allergic to variety. You can expect to see them with stock or original, occasionally the Beggar's Bazooka, and a Market Gardener. With varying levels of skill and success, every single one is exactly the same. You people bore me. Pyro's a little trickier to decide because most weapons see pretty even usage across a lot of the players. Even the suboptimal weapons get plenty of time in the spotlight, so my answer here is short and lame. The powerjack is great because mobility is super useful, but the speed boost feels like it's almost ignorable to me. I'm sure if I were to use it super regularly, then I'd probably feel the difference, but as of right now, I really don't. Plus, me being a scout main, I rarely get medics anyway, so I'm used to playing without them, and I just prefer the back scratcher. To me, effectively supersizing the medium health packs to large is much more valuable than occasionally going a little bit faster. Now, granted, Pyro is not among my most played classes, and my opinions of weapons for him are pretty skewed because of that. But this video is entirely opinion based anyway, so that's my decision. Powerjack is bland and everyone uses it. Moving on. My choice for Demo Man's most overrated weapon barely applies to Demo Man, but rather Demo Knight specifically. I can certainly think of some underrated things like the lock and load, but that's a topic for a different video. Traditional Demo Men with their explosives aren't normally stuck to just one option. I can make an argument for the stock sticky launcher because sticky spam has got to be the most mind-numbingly boring way to play the class. But sticky spam is not the only way to use that weapon, and enough people use side grades or shields for Hybrid Knight that I won't broadly pick that one. So my pick for Demo Man is gonna be the eyelander, specifically on full Demo Knight loadouts. And this time it's not because of balance. The longsword is very powerful and very annoying if abused. And it's my favorite sword of all of them. But I want to clear something up. A Demo Knight with 4 heads or more has a combination of high health, high walk speed, and if paired with a charge and charge, high resistances. It's of course balanced out somewhat by your only damage being melee, so you're victim to air blast happy pyros and sentry nests. But don't forget, if you're using the charge like I said before, you have a way to get on-demand critical hits with your charges. And especially with your high walk speed, which is higher than a scout by the way, you can pretty easily line up critical swings. My point with all of that is your super high godlike kill streak is not impressive. Eyelander Knight is by far the easiest way to a 20 kill streak, unless you count Engineer on Dust Bowl or something. There is almost no reliable way to kill a Demo Knight with heads. His strongest counters are just deterrents, because if you play the game long enough to understand the concept of Demo Knight, then you know charging a Pyro or a Sentry Nest is just a stupid idea. If someone set up a level 3 sentry gun to counter you, literally all you have to do to keep your streak is just not go over there. There's going to be plenty of other players to prey on and continue adding to the growing pile of craniums. Of course, in settings that take themselves more seriously, it might be hard to get any heads at all. The competitive nature of most payload maps and the ever-present sentry encampments kind of push you to obsolescence. But when you go 20, 25, 30 kills in one life in a CTF server or high tower or a place that's not all that serious, I'm making sure you know you really didn't earn that. Demo Knight is fucking brain dead. Don't take that as me telling you not to play the subclass because it's a hell of a lot of fun, but until you start wiping teams or taking out nests solo, don't go parading your skill around. Nobody except the free-to-play is impressed. Heavy's pick is easy, though it's not interesting. A lot of people stand firmly behind their belief that the Tomislav is the best primary choice. As someone who doesn't play heavy much, you can discount my opinion if you want, but in my experience between the two, which is pretty even, the difference between stock and Tomislav is negligible. You can argue that it sometimes makes a small difference, a little bit, maybe, but the way some people talk about it, you would think that it's a night and day comparison. In my experience, stock is perfectly up to snuff. You can also argue that the silent rev gives an advantage, and yes it does to a point, but to me the fun of heavy is being at the front line dumping ammunition towards the enemy until someone dies or the reserves run dry. I don't think I've ever felt the need to ambush somebody by waiting around a corner. If I wanted to do that, I wouldn't have picked the fat ass. And there is one more thing which is definitely more subjective than the rest of this. The Tomislav doesn't scratch my itch of a minigun well enough for me to enjoy it. To me, a big part of my enjoyment for weapons in video games is the audio design, in addition to things like the visual model. A gun has to sound nice in order for me to like it. It's part of why I don't use the panic attack. I don't care if it's technically better than the stock shotgun, the drum on the front looks stupid and it sounds like it's made of plastic. Stock is it just feels way better. And this carries over to miniguns. Tomislav sounds okay, but the minigun sounds really angry, and it just feels so much better to use because of it. Am I weird for that? I don't care either way. Stock is fine for me, get over it. Oh boy, engineer. Dell's got a very nicely made list of items to choose from, and he was probably the hardest to make a decision for, at least when it comes to classes I play regularly. Partially because most of engineer's items are pretty well liked, and reasonably so. It was also difficult to make a decision because I am super partial to the battle engineer playstyle. I prefer to play a slower scout with supportive buildings instead of a hyper-defensive robot babysitter. So you know what, I'm making a totally biased decision on this because this video is super biased anyway. I'm going to put both the Rescue Ranger and Wrangler under the same umbrella. Without a doubt, these are among engineers' best tools, especially for hyper-defense. But hyper-defensive engineering is probably the least interesting way to play this game. Not just doing it myself, but fighting it, especially when you're in a server that very clearly doesn't want to be serious. One engineer with a Rescue Ranger and the Wrangler is almost guaranteed to keep that thing alive indefinitely and prevent anyone from making progress. Fighting a sentry gun that's being healed by an engineer no one can see and is being shielded is probably the most unfun way to play TF2 because you're often forced to stop whatever you're doing for fun to switch to anti-sentry mode. An engineer who isn't cowardly and doesn't use his sentry as a primary source of damage is far more entertaining for literally everyone. Now this is totally subjective, I know, but if you actually like fighting sentries in this way, you're a liar. That shit is awful. The Rescue Ranger isn't really as bad because it's not imbalanced in itself, though I just find it lame. However, the godforsaken is my least favorite weapon in the entire game. I hate it more than I hate Sniper. A core aspect of defensive engineer is learning and knowing good sentry locations that aren't easily pushed, since if you're not careful then no amount of tanking will save it. But the Wrangler throws that idea completely out the window and allows engineers to set up the most ridiculous locations that by principle should not work. This is almost as brain dead as sticky spam. Like, good god, why did anyone think that this was a good idea? So to the engineers who like to spam the hell out of the biggest crutch in the game, congratulations, you've made us all unhappy, and that was probably your goal. Motherfucker, I hate this thing. Medic is one that's a little bit different, in that the perspective I disagree with is less of the user and more of the opponent. I hear so many people complain about the vaccinator like it's the most broken item in Medic's kit, and I hate to break it to you, not even close. Yeah, in some situations it's annoying, just like anything else. I mean, you can't really have something be perfectly balanced in every situation, that's impossible. But people who cry out to the heavens begging for a nerf on this thing, I cannot see your logic. Look at it like this. The vaccinator can enable and Uber for one damage type at a time. So the solution is to attack it with more than one damage type. I know that's a hard concept to wrap your head around, but if you're fighting with a team, like you should be, then it's not difficult to just prod with multiple damage types. Even if you're fighting alone, if one is giving you a hard time, you can switch to Soldier or Pyro so you have two damage types on your person. The only time I've ever really been annoyed with a vaccinator is when trying to counter-snipe a sniper who has a medic sucking him off. I guess in a vacuum this can be somewhat strong, but allow me to remind you the insane power of stock Ubercharge or even the Kritzkrieg in the right circumstances. You see team wipes with those mediguns somewhat regularly, and never once in my life have I seen a vaccinator medic carry a push on his own. For being so overpowered and in need of a nerf, it's a very exploitable medigun, and I don't understand why there seems to be an uprising against it. This one is short, the jarate is lame. It's useful, it's powerful, it's utilitarian, but it puts me to sleep like my OSHA 30 training did. If I was concerned about being supportive by providing mini crits, I'd much rather just change class and use the buff banner. If I was hellbent on extinguishing teammates for some reason, I'd switch to Pyro. And even arguing for the self-defense role, I still prefer the SMG. Both because I don't like get-out-of-jail-free cards, and also because I hate taking my chances with melee hit registration. I mean, I guess it's marginally more entertaining than the backpacks you could use, but throwables are one step above being passive items themselves. And the shields are only seen occasionally, especially when you compare them to like half of the sniper players or more having jarate equipped at all times. By far the biggest snooze fest on this list. Take your unoriginal piss jokes and get out of my office. Last but not least, we get to end this one on another tough call. I see a very diverse kit with most items being used pretty evenly. An argument for underrated weapons would be much easier to make because I have multiple answers for that, and honestly I couldn't make a decision without putting a heavy bias, so that's exactly what I did. Sorry, kind of ending on a fizzle here. And I gotta go with the kunai on this one. Is it good? Yes, absolutely. Here's where the bias comes in. When I play Spy, I don't like being forced to make constant backstabs. For the kunai to be beneficial, you have to be more or less continually making stabs, which makes trick stabs more or less a requirement. Now, for a lot of people, if you ask them what they like about Spy, they probably say backstabs and trick stabs. To them, the mechanic of the knife is the whole reason to play the class. I know this because half of the spies I see will go for what I call the knife fight approach. You know the ones. They always disguise as scout, never even trying to hide and just baiting out trick stabs. They pretty much always have the dead ringer and will probably carry the ambassador, diamondback, or l'étranger. Or something. I'm not even going to try that again. And those people who are in it for the knife kills probably see the kunai as the only reasonable choice of knife. But I myself just like the overall broad idea of being sneaky and disruptive in general. The knife is only a small part of how I play. Granted, part of that is my inability to trick stab, and believe me, I've tried to learn it. I would probably need a professional looking over my shoulder to actually learn that skill. I just can't do it. But regardless, when I play Spy, I don't go for stabs unless the opportunity is clear and I'm confident I can make it. So once the game is over, maybe half of my kills or less are backstabs. The rest are revolver kills. Stabs are infrequent enough to where if I were using the kunai, it would be a downgrade since I'd have 70 health way more often than I'd have overheal. And I know that boils down to being a skill issue, but I considered it overrated because I don't live for the backstabs. I don't constantly throw them out because that's not Spy's only trick. If I haven't established it throughout this video, I don't get people who play for exactly one thing. I really don't like playstyles that are very narrow with their objective or their strengths. Backstabs are just one mechanic of Spy, and had I been forcing myself to just do that one mechanic, I would probably have given up on Spy long ago. And there you are, the opinion of an internet nobody. If you've made it this far, then you're probably asleep and haven't been listening anyways. But in case you haven't already started molesting your keyboard writing out an angry comment, I ask you to not take this personally if you disagree. Primarily because what I say in this format ultimately doesn't matter. This was something I made to provide content for anyone who cares. I think that critical thoughts on subjective topics like this are fun to think about and discuss. Now, if I were some sort of sellout, I'd say some shit about the comment section and wanting to know what you think, but I don't control you, so do as you wish. I'm going to keep working on that different project, and this was supposed to fill the gap between the last upload and that, but I'm having storage problems with my computer, and I've been working so that it didn't come out as soon as I wanted to. But I think that wraps it up. Hopefully that other thing will be done soon enough. Remember, somebody loves you, and have a good day.